What if the frail old woman mopping aisle 9 was actually the owner of the entire store, sent in secret to expose a betrayal within her own family? Hello to all our wise, loyal listeners. You who know the value of hard work, quiet strength, and earned respect. Today's story is a powerful reminder that age doesn't weaken purpose, it sharpens it. You're about to hear how one grieving widow uncovered a web of fraud, cruelty, and greed, and then took back everything they tried to steal. Stay with us, because by the end, you'll never look at a Help Wanted badge the same way again. Rain tapped steadily on the windshield as Eleanor Briggs sat in her old sedan, parked 2 blocks away from the store that bore her family name, Briggs & Son Hardware. Her hand hovered over the name tag clipped to her coat, Ellie Brown. The alias felt strange, almost like a costume, but necessary. It had been 6 months since her husband Calvin passed, and just as long since their nephew Jake had taken over operations. What used to be a pillar of the community had quickly become a revolving door of staff complaints, customer walkouts, and whispers of backroom deals. Eleanor hadn't built this place with Calvin just to watch it rot from the inside. She took a breath, tugged her beanie low to hide her familiar white hair, and stepped into the drizzle, walking toward the storefront that once felt like home. Inside, the warm scent of lumber and motor oil still lingered, but the atmosphere had shifted. A younger woman chewing gum and scrolling her phone behind the customer service counter glanced up, barely hiding a smirk. "You the temp?" she asked. "We weren't expecting a—" "Senior," Eleanor smiled politely. "Ellie Brown, here to help however I can." The smirk deepened. "Right, Jake will love this." Moments later, Jake Simmons emerged from the back, his tailored jacket a stark contrast to the grease-stained walls Calvin used to scrub himself. "Ellie, wow, temp agency didn't mention experience like yours," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "Hope you don't mind mopping spills. Tracy'll get you started." As Eleanor turned to meet Tracy, the assistant manager, she caught a flash of something cold in the woman's eyes, something calculating. Tracy handed her a worn-out apron and pointed to a muddy aisle near the gardening section. "Start there. And watch your step. These floors get slippery." Eleanor took the mop and bent stiffly to her first task. She heard giggles from 2 nearby employees. "She'll last a week tops," one whispered. "Place is turning into a retirement home." Her back ached already, but Eleanor said nothing. She dipped the mop, pushed forward, and let their words sink in. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate her. Because soon enough, they'd learn the truth. She hadn't come to work here, she'd come to watch. And when the time came, she would make them remember who built this place and what it still stood for. 2 weeks before Eleanor Briggs ever touched a mop, she sat alone in her late husband's study, sunlight filtering through the slats and dust motes dancing in the air like the memories she couldn't shake. Calvin's chair sat empty, but his voice echoed in her head. The way someone treats the janitor tells you everything you need to know. It had been their mantra back when they built Briggs & Son Hardware from a single storefront and a borrowed $10,000 0-cents loan. After Calvin's cancer diagnosis, he rewrote the succession plan. Jake Simmons, their bright but untested nephew, would take over day-to-day management for a 1-year trial. If things went smoothly, the full ownership would transfer. On paper, it looked solid. In practice, it had quickly unraveled. First came the customer complaint. A longtime patron wrote that her husband had been yelled at for asking where the replacement drill bits were. Then came the call from Walt, the loyal stockroom manager who'd worked for them since the Reagan years. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "this place ain't what it was. People are quitting, tools are cheap, and Jake, well, he's different now." Eleanor pulled out the latest quarterly report. Sales were technically up, but payroll was down by 35%, and supply costs had mysteriously decreased despite a spike in product returns. Community outreach programs had vanished. The free Saturday workshops for teens, the Veterans Tool Reuse Drive, even the mom-and-pop Discount Mondays were all quietly phased out. Strategic realignment Jake had called it. She met with Frank, her family lawyer, who confirmed her suspicions. While nothing illegal was immediately visible, red flags were everywhere. If you show up as the owner, he warned, they'll smile, open the books, and fake compliance. But if you go in as someone they think, doesn't matter. Eleanor didn't hesitate. I need to see how he treats the forgotten. That'll tell me everything I need to know. She took off her wedding ring, dyed her hair to a drab chestnut, and with Frank's help, forged a new background as Ellie Brown, a retired clerk looking for part-time work. She had one goal: to protect the legacy she and Calvin built and make sure it wasn't sold out for condos and quick cash. Eleanor's first week as Ellie Brown was a masterclass in humiliation but also clarity. By day 2, she was already being tested. Tracy, the assistant manager, accidentally assigned her to the loading dock during a rainstorm, then rolled her eyes when Eleanor returned shivering and soaked. "Maybe next time wear shoes with grip, Grandma," she quipped, loud enough for the younger employees to hear. They snickered. Behind the scenes, it was no better. The buddy system Calvin had implemented for new hires was gone. No one showed Eleanor the safety checklist. No one helped her find where the industrial batteries were shelved. She had to learn by watching, listening, pretending to fumble, and she did it all silently, with a smile, while documenting everything with the smart badge hidden in her apron. She noticed the signs of rot immediately. Shelves were poorly stocked with off-brand tools Eleanor had never authorized. Customers returned items more often than they bought them. Veteran employees like Walt, who used to train staff with pride, now moved quietly and hesitantly, heads low. Eleanor watched Tracy berate a teen cashier named Rosa for ringing up a customer too slowly. Rosa's hands trembled as she apologized, and Eleanor's heart ached. These weren't isolated moments. They were daily patterns. An intentional culture of intimidation. Jake strutted through the aisles like a tech startup CEO, in a blazer too tight and loafers too polished for real work. Every so often, he would wink at Tracy or share a private joke that made Eleanor's stomach twist. By Thursday, Eleanor had been assigned the junk aisle, a dimly lit section near the back of the store, cluttered with dented toolboxes and leftover seasonal displays. It was retail Siberia. She cleaned, reorganized, and even created a neat clearance shelf by category, just like she and Calvin used to do. The next day, she found her display trashed, the signs ripped, and the organization ruined. "Customers don't care about that stuff," Jake told her with a fake grin. "Just keep it stocked." Later, she overheard 2 employees whispering near the break room. "Bet she doesn't last the week." "Yeah, Tracy says they're stress testing the new hires now. If they break, they're not worth keeping." Eleanor absorbed every word. She didn't flinch when she was told to scrub the restroom floor or sweep behind the paint mixer where the fumes made her dizzy. She'd been underestimated her whole life. But this week, they had no idea who they were really testing. And they were about to fail. By the second week, the hardware store's rhythm became more familiar to Eleanor. But no less disheartening. The abuse was no longer surprising, just routine. But amid the harshness, quiet allies began to emerge. Rosa, the soft-spoken teenager who stocked shelves and ran the register when short-staffed, had a kindness that couldn't be taught. One afternoon, after Tracy scolded Eleanor for being too slow on a return and muttered something about keeping up or quitting, Rosa slipped Eleanor a water bottle and whispered, "Don't let her get to you. She does this to everyone she thinks won't talk back." It was the first unprompted kindness Eleanor had received since starting. Later that day, in the stockroom, Walt, grizzled, quiet, and nearing 70, found her reorganizing a shipment of caulking guns that had been dumped haphazardly. "You're doing it the old way," he said quietly. "That's how we used to do it, before things changed." When Eleanor asked why he hadn't spoken up, he just shook his head. "Tried once, got my hours cut, and my benefits questioned," he sighed. "You don't speak if you want to stay." His eyes lingered on hers a little longer than usual. "But I see you watching. You ain't just here for the paycheck, are you?" Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't have to. That evening, in the break room, Rosa told her more. "We used to have trade classes here. Mr. Calvin ran them. I wanted to learn carpentry, but Jake said it wasn't cost-effective and canceled them. Her voice dropped. Now he says if I want to move up, I have to be flexible with shifts and other things. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She didn't press yet, but she took mental note of every word and stored it alongside the growing audio files on her hidden badge recorder. These people, Rosa, Walt, and others, weren't just victims of mismanagement. They were witnesses. They were the soul of the place Calvin had built. Eleanor realized her mission had grown. This wasn't only about catching Jake in financial fraud. This was about saving something sacred. And those still standing in the shadows, those who still believed in what the store used to be, were counting on someone to finally step into the light and fight back. It was a Friday afternoon when everything came crashing down, emotionally, physically, and symbolically. The store had been short-staffed all week, and Eleanor, already dealing with a pulled shoulder from lifting bulk paint buckets, was ordered by Tracy to sweep out the loading dock before the corporation seized the mess. Rain had turned the concrete slippery, and just as Eleanor stepped out with the push broom, Tracy smirked and tossed a half-filled trash bag at her feet. It burst open, scattering soggy cardboard and rusted nails. "Oops," she said with mock sweetness, loud enough for the two younger employees watching from inside to laugh. Eleanor bent slowly, her back stiff, hands raw and trembling from the cold. Her grip slipped. She fell onto the wet concrete. No one rushed to help. Tracy watched for a second, then walked away. Jake eventually appeared, his phone still in hand. He looked down at her soaked clothes and scraped palm and muttered, "Maybe this job's a little much for someone your age. It's okay. Some people just can't keep up." The words weren't yelled, they were dismissive, and for Eleanor, it hurt more than the fall. Later, she sat alone in the break room, cradling her bruised wrist and staring at the flickering vending machine. Her apron was stained. Her pride was gutted. And for the first time since Calvin's funeral, she felt truly invisible. She wondered if this was what happened when you outlived your usefulness. Not hated, not fought, just ignored. Forgotten. Rosa entered quietly and sat beside her, sliding over a small bottle of antiseptic. "I saw what happened," she said softly. "Jake's wrong. You do matter. You're the only one here who treats people like people." That small act, just a teenager showing compassion, nearly undid Eleanor. Her throat tightened. She turned away to hide the tears. That night, Eleanor went home and stared at Calvin's photo on the mantel. "They think I'm broken," she whispered. "They think I'm too old to fight." But inside, something reignited. Not rage, resolve. If they thought she didn't matter, then they'd never see her coming, and they'd never expect what came next. Over the weekend, Eleanor transformed from bruised and humiliated to laser-focused. She called Frank, her longtime attorney, and looped in Detective Hart, a retired local officer who had once helped Calvin investigate a shady vendor contract years ago. Together, they began peeling back the layers. Hart pulled zoning records and property transactions, and it didn't take long to uncover a disturbing connection. Jake Simmons had been in quiet contact with a development firm called Horizon Creek Holdings, one known for buying up old small businesses and flipping them into strip malls. The kicker? 61 years old. A zoning variance request had already been submitted for the Briggs & Son property, co-signed by none other than Stanley Weller, a city planner who'd attended Calvin's funeral and offered support to the family. Eleanor's gut had been right. Jake wasn't just mismanaging the store, he was actively sabotaging it. The inventory shrinkage wasn't random. Hart discovered that tools marked as damaged were being rerouted through a dummy supplier Jake controlled. Payroll? Dozens of hours missing, likely pocketed. Even the canceled community programs, including the trades apprenticeship Calvin had founded, had freed up budget lines now suspiciously redirected into consulting fees. But Eleanor knew that catching Jake on paper wouldn't be enough. He'd talk his way out of it, blame the system, call it restructuring. No, this had to be public. It had to be irrefutable. So she spent the next several shifts gathering final evidence. Her hidden badge recorded conversations where Tracy joked about moving stolen inventory between locations to dodge audits. She overheard Jake promise Rosa a promotion if she agreed to be more flexible with after-hours help. Eleanor even managed to snap a photo of a shipment marked as disposed being loaded into Jake's personal SUV. Then came the invitation she'd been waiting for. Jake announced the store would host the annual Founders Day Hardware Expo the following weekend. Press, city officials, and community leaders all expected to attend. Perfect chance to show off how we're modernizing, he bragged to the staff, not realizing he was setting the stage for his own downfall. Eleanor smiled faintly as she mopped the showroom floor that night. Let him celebrate. Let him strut in front of cameras and pretend he'd built what he was about to destroy, because when the crowd gathered, she would be there. No longer Ellie Brown, invisible temp, but Eleanor Briggs, co-founder, owner, and the one person who still remembered what this store stood for. The trap was set, and it was going to snap shut in front of everyone. The morning of the Founders Day Hardware Expo dawned crisp and bright, with banners fluttering in front of Briggs & Son Hardware and rows of folding chairs set up near the lumber aisle, where Jake had arranged for a podium and refreshments. Camera crews from the local news station were already there, along with city council members, small business owners, and even school officials who once partnered with the store back when Calvin ran weekend workshops. Jake buzzed with confidence, his blazer crisp, smile polished. He shook hands, posed for photos, and made small talk about revitalizing the downtown corridor. But his confidence cracked the moment Eleanor stepped through the automatic doors, not as Ellie the temp, but as Eleanor Briggs, dressed sharply in Calvin's old navy blazer and pearls, her white hair elegantly styled. The hush fell across the room as familiar employees froze mid-thought. Walt dropped a box of screws. Rosa gasped audibly. Eleanor didn't need to announce herself. Her presence spoke louder than any microphone could. But she walked straight to the podium anyway, stopping Jake in mid-sentence as he introduced himself to the media. "You'll have to excuse me," she said calmly. "There's been a mistake. One that's gone on too long." Jake blinked, then tried to laugh it off. This is a bit of a surprise, don't you think?" She held up a flash drive. "Surprises are only shocking to those unprepared. This contains audio and photo documentation of employee abuse, payroll fraud, and an illegal inventory laundering scheme." She turned toward the crowd. "Many of you knew my husband Calvin. He believed this store was built on community, respect, and honest work. That foundation has been compromised." Gasps spread as Eleanor played audio through the loudspeakers. Jake mocking staff, Tracy threatening Rosa, even a snippet of Jake discussing cleaning out the old-timers before the sale goes through. Detective Hart, standing quietly with two uniformed officers, stepped forward and handed Jake a folder. "Mr. Simmons, you'll need to come with us." Tracy tried to slip out the side door but was intercepted by Rosa and Walt, now standing tall behind Eleanor. The staff began to applaud, first hesitant, then thunderous, as Eleanor addressed them directly. "This is your store. It always was, and starting today, it's going back to what it was meant to be." Jake, red-faced and sputtering, was led away. Justice had come. And it arrived right there in aisle 9, between the galvanized screws and the legacy he tried to destroy. In the days that followed the public takedown, Briggs & Son Hardware became more than just a headline. It became a symbol. Local newspapers ran the story under bold headlines like "The Temp Who Was the Owner" and "Justice at the Hardware Store." The footage of Eleanor confronting Jake went viral, sparking national coverage on morning talk shows. But for Eleanor, the real work was just beginning. She didn't relish the spotlight. She only cared that the store her husband had built and the people who had quietly suffered were finally being seen. She arrived early the next morning, before the sun rose, just like Calvin used to, and found Rosa already there, sweeping the sidewalk with a sense of purpose that hadn't been present 2 weeks earlier. Eleanor called a staff meeting that morning. Not in the office, but on the sales floor, where everyone could see one another eye to eye. She spoke plainly. "What happened here won't be forgotten," she said, "but it won't define us either. We rebuilt from here, and this time, we will do it together." She announced new positions. Rosa would be trained as assistant manager, a position Eleanor had created specifically to support and develop young talent. Walt would take over as head of training and mentorship, using his decades of knowledge to guide the next generation of tradespeople. Tracy's toxic legacy was gone, but the structure she left behind, the fear, the silence, had to be dismantled piece by piece. One of Eleanor's first official acts was reinstating Calvin's apprenticeship fund. She contacted the local trade school and revived the Saturday Workshop series, offering hands-on skills training for high schoolers and veterans alike. The back storeroom, once used to stash stolen merchandise, was transformed into a learning space with benches, toolkits, and a wall display of past apprentices who had gone on to become carpenters, electricians, and mechanics. Rosa helped hang the new banner over the entrance, "Tools of Tomorrow." But perhaps the most moving moment came a week later, when Walt brought in an old photograph. Calvin standing outside the original store in the 1970s, smiling, arms crossed, the sun catching his silver-rimmed glasses. Eleanor had it framed and placed behind the main counter, above a sign that read, "Built on integrity, rebuilt with heart." Customers began returning in droves, not just to buy tools, but to say thank you. A veteran who hadn't stepped foot in the store in a year came in just to shake Eleanor's hand. A teenager who once dropped out of school applied for the apprenticeship program. Even city officials, eager to distance themselves from the corruption, publicly praised Eleanor's leadership and offered grants to improve the storefront's historic preservation. The store buzzed again, but this time not with tension or fear. It buzzed with pride and dignity, and something even rarer in the modern world, hope, that good people, when pushed too far, will still stand up and rebuild. The scent of sawdust and fresh-cut lumber drifted through the store on a quiet Saturday morning as Eleanor Briggs sat on the same bench where she and Calvin had once shared coffee before opening. The air was crisp, the kind of early autumn stillness that felt like a reset button. She watched as a young father helped his daughter pick out her first toolbox, a bright red set Eleanor herself had once helped design for beginner workshops. Across the sales floor, Rosa directed a group of teens through the newly relaunched Tools of Tomorrow program, her voice firm but encouraging, the way Eleanor remembered Calvin's had been. Walt stood nearby, chuckling as he explained torque wrenches to a curious boy who looked about 12. The store buzzed, not with the grind of a struggling business, but with life, purpose, continuity. Eleanor sipped her tea and looked toward the framed photo of Calvin now hanging above the checkout counter. The caption beneath it, "Built on integrity, rebuilt with heart," made her smile. She had been so afraid in those quiet months after his death that everything they'd built would fade without him. But in fighting to restore the soul of the store, she had discovered something deeper. That legacy isn't just about preservation. The people they had mentored, the values they had upheld, the love they had poured into this place, it all lived on, not in marble or memory, but in motion. Her phone buzzed gently beside her, a text from Frank, "New proposal from Ridgeway Supply, national partnership offer attached." Eleanor read the words, then tapped the screen off. She'd consider it, maybe, tomorrow. Today was about this moment, about watching Rosa lead with confidence, about hearing customers laugh again in the aisles, about knowing the same worn hardwood floors she and Calvin had walked on for decades now carried the weight of a future they could be proud of. As the bell above the door jingled, an elderly woman entered, guiding her grandson toward the screw bins. "Let's ask someone," the boy said. "I want to make sure I get the right size." Eleanor stood and stepped aside to let them pass, and as she did, she noticed a small sign Rosa had tacked near the entrance, "Where everyone matters."
The words hit her harder than expected, because that's what had nearly been lost. Not just money or reputation, but that principle that everyone, from a teen apprentice to an aging stock clerk, deserved respect, that customers weren't just transactions, but neighbors, that work, when done with care, could be sacred. Eleanor brushed a speck of dust from Calvin's photo and whispered, "We didn't just save it, love. We made it stronger." She stepped back and watched the store unfold like a living tribute. And in that moment, she knew she hadn't merely preserved a legacy, she had passed it on. The story of Eleanor Briggs teaches us that legacy is not defined by age, titles, or appearances. It's defined by values lived out, even when no one is watching. Eleanor's willingness to humble herself, to endure disrespect and physical hardship, reveals a truth that resonates deeply with anyone over 50. Real leadership doesn't demand recognition. It earns it through quiet resilience and unwavering integrity. Her journey reminds us that betrayal, especially by those we trust, can wound deeply, but it can also awaken a deeper purpose. Eleanor didn't just expose corruption, she restored dignity to a place that had lost its way. She showed that it's never too late to take a stand, to fight for what matters, and to empower the next generation to do the same. In a world obsessed with speed and shortcuts, this story is a powerful call to remember what lasts: respect, community, honesty, and heart. Eleanor didn't preserve her husband's legacy by standing still. She lived it, breathed it, and passed it on by example. Let this story inspire you to speak up, stand firm, and never let anyone tell you you're too old to make a difference.